This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. Today in a Democracy Now! Special, I'm joined by three guests. They were friends who set out on a hike in the summer of 2009 in Iraq's Kurdish region near the Iranian border. But their hike ended in their arrest. Shane Bauer and Josh Fatal were held in Iran for more than 2 years, and Sarah Shord, now married to Shane Bauer, was held for more than a year, much of it in solitary confinement. The three of them tell their story in a new book released today. It's called A Sliver of Light, 3 Americans Imprisoned in Iran. I asked Sarah Shord to take us back to the day in 2009 when they set out for their hike.
Shane and I have been living in the Middle East for more than a year, Amy. We were living in Damascus, and we traveled all around the region. And northern Iraq, Iraqi Kurdistan, was a new part of the Middle East that we were eager to explore. Josh came to visit, and we all agreed that it was an exciting prospect. We'd done research in the area. Northern Iraq, Iraqi Kurdistan, is a semi-autonomous part of Iraq. And actually, in 2011, it was on the top 41 travel destinations in the New York Times. So no American has been killed or captured there in recent decades. It's not a war zone. And we went there because I had a week off work, and we wanted to enjoy ourselves.
Explain the work you were doing more in Syria.
I was working with Iraqi refugees. It was the Iraqi Student Project, helping young Iraqis who'd been in college when the U.S.-led war started in Iraq, and they couldn't continue their education in Syria. They were barred from higher education. So we were helping them get into schools in the U.S. and Europe.
And Shane, you were?
I was working as a journalist in the Middle East. Mm-hmm.
So Josh comes to visit you, and you go on this week's vacation to show him a good time.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Our other friend, Sean McVessel, was there. He decided to stay in the hotel, thankfully for us, because he was the one that later was able to inform the embassy in Baghdad that we've been captured. We came to a tourist site called Ahmed Awa that had been recommended to us by several people, and it was full of people, teeming with life, hundreds of Kurdish with their families camping.
It's waterfalls?
Yeah, it's a small waterfall, but it's any water is a big attraction in that area. So it was lovely. Someone pointed out a trail to us, and if we made any mistake, we hiked too far. We were maybe a bit overzealous and incredibly happy to be together. We saw a soldier in the distance, and he called for us to come to him. And of course, our first thought was, oh, this is a Kurdish soldier. We're going to have a cup of tea and interesting conversation.
Did anyone warn you at the hotel, by the way, you're going to be on the border, be very careful?
No one mentioned it. Yeah, we went through several checkpoints. We actually saw Kurdish soldiers when we were at Ahmed Awa, and no one mentioned our proximity to the Iranian border.
So, Josh, you're along for the ride here. You guys are hiking. You're seeing each other. It's a reunion. You haven't seen each other for a while. Talk about that hike.
I had been teaching at a university program in Switzerland, India, Africa, and China.
What were you teaching?
It was a program for American students studying international healthcare. And when that program ended in May, I figured I should travel a little bit more before heading back to the United States. So I went to the Middle East and visited these guys. Ended up there a little bit longer than I expected. But so when we were on the hike, when we got to the top, we soon realized that we were in Iran, and this is not what we had expected.
Can I just ask something? Do you think you actually crossed the border? Was there a fence there? Was there some marker?
No.
No.
So do you know if you had crossed the border before the Iranian soldier beckoned you?
Well, we were told, after we were arrested, we were kind of taken across the ridge where there was kind of a hut, kind of shack where the soldiers were, and there was one soldier spoke a tiny bit of English, and we said we want to go back to Iraq. We asked him where the border was, and he pointed to this kind of path, that we had been walking on, and he said that's the border. And there was kind of like a little mound alongside it, and so when they called us, we had actually crossed that path. So from what he was saying, we crossed the border when they actually called us over, and he actually contacted Sarah later on Facebook
Really?
Yeah, one of the soldiers contacted me on Facebook. So many people from our experience, other prisoners that we were celled alongside, have contacted me on all of us on Facebook. But at first I didn't believe him. I said, okay, this is Facebook. Why should I believe you? Prove it. And he gave me, he knew really specific details, and he convinced me that he was one of those soldiers. And I asked him, where's the border? And he said, it's the trail that we were walking on. So we were on the trail, and they called us off the trail.
And he apologized.
He apologized. I'd like to ask, through this broadcast, I'd like each of you to read a selection from A Sliver of Light. Let's start with Shane.
Sure. This was a couple of days after we had been arrested. We were being transferred around western Iran, and at nighttime we're put into a car and we're driven out in the countryside. "Where are we going?" Sarah asks in a disarming, honey-sweet voice. "Sss," the pudgy man hisses, turning around to face us and putting his finger to his lips. The headlights of the car trailing us light up his face, revealing his cold, bored eyes. He turns back to face the front. The solitary lights of the country houses stream by like little meteorites. The car falls silent again. He picks up a gun in his right hand and cocks it 3 times. Sarah's eyes widen. Her posture stiffens. She leans towards the man in the front and, with a note of desperation, says, "Ahmadinejad good, Obama bad." The pistol is resting on his lap. He turns to face us again and holds his 2 hands out with palms facing each other. "Iran," he says, nodding towards his one hand. "America," he says, lifting the other. "Problem," he says, stretching out the distance between them. He checks our faces to make sure his message registered, then drops his arms. Sarah turns to me and starts. What does she see? Her eyes are penetrating. "Do you think he's going to hurt us?" she asks. I don't know whether to respond to her or just stare at her. I'm terrified. We walk into our fear together, letting it surround us softly like a fog. The immediate prospect of death seems so different than I had imagined it. In my mind, I see us pulling over to the side of the road and leaving the car quietly. My tremulous legs will convey me mechanically over the rocky earth. I will be holding Sarah's hand, and maybe Josh's too, but I will be mostly gone already, walking flesh with no spirit. We won't kiss passionately in our final moments before the trigger pull. We won't scream. We won't run. We won't utter fabulous words of defiance as we stare down the gun barrel. We will be like mice, paralyzed by fear, limp in the slack jaw of a cat. We will just stand there. Each of us will fall, one by one, hitting the gravelly earth with a thud.
That's Shane Bauer reading from his new book, I should say their new book, A Sliver of Light, 3 Americans Imprisoned in Iran. We're joined by Shane, Josh, and Sarah. Shane, the selection you just read is chilling. So talk about what happened from there.
After the section,
That was how long after you were beckoned by the soldier?
I think that was 2 days after, if I remember right. And after that happened, we were actually taken to a jail out in the country, a small jailhouse. It seemed to be empty, and we were kept there for a couple of days. And we still thought we were going to be taken back to Iraq. We were near the border, and we were then one morning picked up, and they told us they were taking us back to Iraq. And we drove and eventually realized that we were driving east, and we'd been driving east for a few hours, and realized that we were going to Tehran. And we got to Tehran and were put in a van, blindfolded, and driven to what we later found out, months later really, found out was Evin prison, the central prison of Iran.
Where how many prisoners are held?
I don't know the total number of prisoners held there, but there's hundreds of political prisoners. It's a massive prison.
At what point did you start to understand what you would be charged with?
Up until the end, they weren't telling us. It wasn't until 6 or so months in we saw a news ticker saying that American spies to go to trial at some point, and then we kept telling our interrogators, what are we being charged with? And they would say, we don't know. And then at that point we said, well, set it on TV.
And they told us that they knew, our interrogators told us not long after we were arrested in our interrogations that they knew that we weren't spies. They told us that our situation had become political and that it was going to take negotiations between our government and their government for us to be released, and we would just have to wait for that.
Shane Bauer, Sarah Short, and Josh Fatal. They're speaking about their experience in an Iranian prison after they were arrested in 2009. They tell their story in a new book released today, A Sliver of Light, 3 Americans imprisoned in Iran. We continue our conversation in a minute.